Andy Johnson, Minnesota State University. We are looking at some tips for designing brain-based learning in your classroom. This is taken from a most excellent book by Eric Jensen, Teaching with the Brain in Mind. You can influence learning a great deal in your classroom. From a neurological point of view, learning is creating, developing, and strengthening these dot-to-dot pictures in our head called neural networks. And we're going to look at 7 critical factors. The first is engagement. Learning is most efficient when our attention is focused and concentrated, not dispersed. To pay attention, students have to engage and maintain the appropriate neural networks and exclude distractors, both external and internal, things that would distract their attention. To enhance focused attention, sometimes allow students to choose relevant, meaningful learning. Not only what are you interested in, what do you want to learn about, but how do you want to learn? How do you want to demonstrate your learning? Allow students to become engrossed, engaged in learning without regard for time. This is block scheduling. And think of young children who become engrossed in something for hours at a time. Learning is a natural human condition. We have to ask ourselves, what do we do to disrupt this natural human condition in our schools? Reduce threat response, no teasing from classmates and bullies, and no threat of failure or embarrassment in the classroom. Provide time for internal processing of your input. This means slow down, more pauses. We need to think more often. Cut the length of focused attention time expected or required. This is most interesting for adults. 15 to 8 minutes. Tell a little bit and then do a little bit. We have to get rid of this idea that simply dumping more content means more learning. Design compelling, relevant tasks, activities that engage high levels of cognition and movement versus passively receiving stuff. Let students set goals. Change things. Differentiate things, tone of voice, location, emotional climate, groups. Use vocal pauses, cliffhangers, and surprise. Use activities in active learning. Cooperative learning is wonderful because you have to engage in conversation. You learn at deeper levels. Repetition. Pre-exposure is covertly preparing students for future learning. You kind of touch on things before you actually study them. Previewing at the start of a lesson. Advanced organizers. Simple explanation. Questions. Graphic organizers. Overview. Give them a preview of what is to be learned. Semantic priming is some exposure to intended target information or vocabulary words. Use the words or get them using the words. Reviewing, go over, reviewing, viewing again what they've already learned. Have them create mental models or mind maps or graphic organizers. Revising or reconstructing learning, not earning, that was achieved hours, days, or weeks in the past. And again, these mind maps and graphic organizers are great for having students reconstructing their learning. Remember, memory is not replicating, it is reconstructing. We never replicate exactly. Input quality, teach less, more in-depth. Instead of covering up with layers, think of carrots with lots of roots. Teach less information, more in-depth. Provide structure, planned redundancy, and organization. Slow it down. The brain requires time to process and store information. Create pauses and spaces both within the lessons and the curriculum. Remember, 2 to 5 minutes, pause, have them do something. Provide much more processing time. Coherence students need to see the structure. If it is organized out there, they can better organize it in here and find similarities. Create meaningful content. Meaningful learning is when they're able to attach the new to what's inside here. Rote learning is what you just memorize and it's not attached to anything. Help them relate new to the known, not related. Students should be active, do something with the new input, and reflective, able to think about it. And students should be able to learn in relevant context. I could teach grammar simply outside of any writing context, but it is much more efficient if I teach it in the context of their own writing. Relevant. Prior knowledge is very, very, very important because we attach new to the known. So find out what students already know in order to help them make connections or to revise. Use analogies and metaphors. We connect with what they already know and get students to practice retrieving pertinent information. And again, have them create mind maps, mental models, concept maps, graphic organizers. Timing. Expect students to vary in their performance at different times of the day, just like we do. We cannot expect ourselves to get up and function at peak performance for 8 hours. So we do things, include physical movement, standing, stretching to get that brain working again, and utilize block scheduling. It'd be hard for any of us to function in 50-minute slots like we ask students to do. If we have block scheduling, that accounts for the normal ups and downs of our mental thinking. Error correction, error learning is how the brain works best. More messing about, group discussions, case studies, game simulations, writing assignments with feedback. Student rubrics, high feedback activities and assignments. You need to mess about, get feedback. Use immediate feedback activities and assignments. Neural connections are made more efficient by providing feedback. Design activities that enable students to test hypotheses and make mistakes. Discovery learning is a great model here, where they mess about and then you give instruction. Enable them to make mistakes with feedback and evaluate, reflect, and change their learning. Here are some types of feedback activities. Model building, peer editing, pair share, turn to a buddy. Student presentation with feedback, competitive games. By the way, presentation, a simple way, a way that's not threatening, 2 things they did well, 2 things to work on. Competitive games, video or audio tape or audio recordings. We don't use tape anymore, where they're able to listen to their own performance. Author's chair or fishbowl, where groups do something and the class watches and gives feedbacks. Checklists or rubrics, so that students can evaluate their own products or performance. And lastly, emotional state. Emotions are one of the greatest regulators of learning and memory. They influence how and what we remember, how and what we perceive. So emotional states include motivation. So we want to utilize activities that minimize risk, pair share, small group speeches, and create excitement, science fairs, debate, etc. And I will devote more on this in another video. But here are the 7 critical factors, brain-based learning. Good stuff.